It was a quiet evening, just a few days before Christmas. I was alone in my flat, enjoying my first evening of Christmas leave with my dog Max, who was curled up at the foot of my couch. The weather was really nasty outside, and the flat that I was in at the time was a corner unit, so whenever the wind blew particularly hard, it created this cartoonish howling sound, which, if you were nice and warm inside, was actually quite comforting. It was about 6 a.m. I was on my couch under a pile of blankets sipping a cup of coffee when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't a loud knock, but it was sudden enough to startle me. It wasn't often that anyone knocked on my door because we had an intercom system for the building. If someone was knocking, it was most probably one of my neighbors. I didn't hesitate to get up and walk down the corridor towards the front door, but out of curiosity, I had looked through the peephole so I could see who it was, and there was a man dressed as Father Christmas with a clipboard in one hand and one of those plastic charity collection cups in the other. You know the kind with just a little slot on the top to put money in. He was wearing the whole Santa Claus getup, hat and fake silvery beard included, so I couldn't see exactly who was underneath it, but the clipboard and collection cup had me assuming that it was one of my neighbors collecting for charity. I cracked the door open just a sliver, keeping the chain lock in place, and then said, "Hi there," and the assumption that he was about to explain what charity he was collecting for, etc. But after taking an innocent-looking step toward the door and raising the collection cup, the man lunged at the door and pressed his weight against it in an attempt to force it open. His eyes were the only part of him that I could really see, but the way they changed in that moment was absolutely terrifying. They were so wide and his face turned so red. But as he pushed the door chain, caught with a loud metal snap it was holding, but just barely, and I remember how panic rose up in me as he continued to push. The door rattled on its hinges as the man shoved even harder, growling sometimes under his breath as he forced his hand through the gap, his fingers clawing at the chain. Everything happened in a blur. I tried to push the door shut, but he was too strong, and when the chain suddenly snapped, the door flew open and he was inside. As he came towards me, the smell of alcohol hit me like a wave. I screamed, backing away as fast as I could, but the apartment was small. There was nowhere to run. My back hit the wall and he was on me, his breath hot and rancid as his hands grabbed my arms, and he used his weight to pin me in place. Then I heard the low guttural growl cutting through the chaos like some blade, and in the corner of my vision, I saw Max leap up off the couch, his hackles raised and teeth bared. And I'd never seen him like that before. He'd always been such a sweet, gentle dog with people and other animals. But that night, he was transformed into a furious, snarling beast. Max launched himself at the man and bit the arm that he was using to hold me. The man screamed, and then loosened his grip as he tried to shake Max off. I remember seeing skin and blood under his torn red suit as Max held on, growling loudly the whole time, the man's stum LED back hammering his other fist against the top of Max's head. But he was relentless. He bit and clawed. His sheer determination, driving the man further away from me, giving me time to scramble to my feet. My legs trembled so badly that I could barely stand. But adrenaline pushed me to grab the first thing I could reach, which happened to be a very heavy wooden Buddha statue from the shelf. I hurled it at the man point blank too, and it hit him so hard in the face that it split his forehead over open. He shouted something terrible, staggering backwards while bringing up a hand to his face. Max let go of his arm, but then chased him all the way down the corridor, snapping at his legs as he staggered back towards the open doorway with blood streaming down his face, and into that fake silvery white beard he stumbled out of my flat, but Max stopped at the threshold to bark ferociously at him. As the man disappeared down the stairs, no one noticed. Came out of their flats to help me. Most had gone home to see family elsewhere, I think, and anyone in those flats either didn't hear the commotion or just pretended not to for a moment, after I pulled Max in and closed the door. There was silence except for Max's ragged breathing. I managed to walk back into my living room, and then I sat down on the couch again, trembling in a state of disbelief. It all happened so suddenly, and it had ended just as quickly. I think that it must have been no more than 2 minutes from the knock on my door to me sitting back down on my couch again. It was all surreal. Max trotted over to me, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at me with this sort of "I did a good job" look. And I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his fur, and I started to cry. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to call the police. They arrived quickly, and I explained everything, and they examined the scene S.E. before taking a few photos of the broken door chain. They were both very nice. And as one of the officers knelt down to pet Max, he said, "This one's a little hero, isn't he?" And I couldn't have agreed more. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know what would have happened. And thinking about it makes my stomach churn. The man in the Santa suit was caught not far away, still bleeding from the bites my dog had given him. The police later told me that he had a criminal record, a very long one, which honestly didn't surprise me. But what did surprise me was how brazen he'd been about it, how he'd just knocked on someone's door almost at random. But it wasn't at random, not according to the police. It couldn't have been. And what they told me would come to haunt me for a very long, long time. And that night in bed, as I lay there with Max curled up beside me, I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt too quiet, too dark, and every little noise made my heart race. But whenever the fear threatened to overwhelm me, I reached out and rested my hand on Max's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He was my protector, my best friend. And I never felt so fortunate to have him in my life. Christmas came and went, but the break-in had a way of overshadowing things. I asked my mom not to tell anyone about it over Christmas dinner, because it was a chance for me to try and forget about it, even if it was just for an afternoon, but even then, it was still there in the background. I felt a lot less safe back in my flat, and any safety that I felt before felt like a silly little illusion, but I also felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was okay. Max had saved me, and that was all that mattered. From that day onward, I never took his loyalty for granted. I gave him extra treats, took him on extra long walks, and gave him all the love I could possibly give. He had been there for me when I needed him most, and I would spend the rest of my life repaying that debt. It was the day before Christmas, and the store was chaotic, with last-minute shoppers piled high with wrapping paper, decorations, and toys, and the shelves were almost bare with only a few items left that looked like decent gifts, and people seemed frantic, grabbing whatever they could find. I was in the toy section trying to find something for my niece, and it was very slim pickings then. I asked my mom not to tell anyone about it over Christmas dinner, because it was a chance for me to try and forget about it, even if it was just for an afternoon, but even then, it was still there in the background. I felt a lot less safe back in my flat, and any safety that I felt before felt like a silly little illusion, but I also felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was okay. Max had saved me, and that was all that mattered. From that day onward, I never took his loyalty for granted. I gave him extra treats, took him on extra long walks, and gave him all the love I could possibly give. He had been there for me when I needed him most, and I would spend the rest of my life repaying that debt. It was the day before Christmas, and the store was chaotic, with last-minute shoppers piled high with wrapping paper, decorations, and toys, and the shelves were almost bare with only a few items left that looked like decent gifts, and people seemed frantic, grabbing whatever they could find. I was in the toy section trying to find something for my niece, and it was very slim pickings then. Noticed a toy on the shelf that seemed to be the hot item. It was brightly colored and packaged to grab attention, and there was only a couple left, and I saw two parents reach for the same one at the exact same time. One was a man and the other was a woman, and they both grabbed it and wouldn't let go. They started arguing right away. The voices were sharp and loud, cutting through the noise of the store. Other shoppers began to notice and stop. To watch neither of them would back down. The man pulled on the toy, but the woman held on tightly, and they were glaring at each other. and their faces were just red with frustration, and it was clear that neither was going to give up. The tension grew as they continued to fight over this toy. The man shoved the woman, and she stumbled but didn't seem to fall, and she came right back at him, reaching for the toy again. And that's when it escalated. The man leaned in, bit her arm hard. She screamed, and I saw blood starting to rush down her arm from where his teeth had broken the skin. People nearby gasped and backed away some, tried to step in, but the man was still holding onto the toy, his grip seemingly unrelenting, and the woman clutched her arm, wincing in pain, but she didn't let go of the toy. Either store employees came running, and somewhere in the background I could hear the faint sound of sirens getting closer, and eventually the man dropped the toy onto the floor. He looked around, his chest was just heaving as he tried to catch his breath. And then he turned, started walking away like nothing had happened at all. The woman was still holding her arm, and she bent down and picked up the toy, and she seemed to have clung to it like it was the most important thing in the world. The police arrived shortly after, and they spoke to both of those people, and the man was taken away. The woman was given first aid for the bite, and she looked shaken and pale but refused to let go of that toy. The crowd that gathered slowly dispersed, and finally the store fell quiet again. People whispered as they walked away, avoiding that section of the store. And I left the store without buying anything. My hands were empty, but my mind was full of many questions. How could something like that, like a toy, lead to such violence? And as I walked in my car, I kept thinking about the child who would receive that toy. Would they ever even really know what their mom went through to get it? I hoped they wouldn't when they couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the whole scene had left behind. Christmas Eve was cold. I was walking through the streets carrying a bag of gifts, and the sidewalks were busy, and there were lights and decorations everywhere. I saw a man sitting on the curb near an empty lot, and his coat was very old and torn. He had a long beard and wore a beanie, and I thought he was homeless and needed help. I felt bad for him. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. I walked over and held it out to him, and he looked at me, but his eyes didn't seem thankful. He didn't look happy at all. He just sort of stared. I thought he was surprised, so I leaned down and put the money in his hand, and as soon as I did, he stood up very quickly. He was bigger than I expected, and he moved fast. I stepped back, but he grabbed my coat and pushed me down. My back hit the ground, and I couldn't get up, and he started hitting me. His fist came down hard, and I tried to cover my face, but it didn't help. My head was spinning and everything hurt, and I could hear people walking by, but no one stopped. I couldn't call for help. After a while, he stopped, and he stood over me, breathing heavily, and he bent down, picked up the $20 and put it in his pocket, and then he walked away. I just laid there, too hurt to move, and when I finally sat up, my coat was torn and my face was bleeding. My bag of gifts was on the ground, so I picked it up, and the lot where the man had been sitting was empty now, and I didn't know where he went. I just walked home slowly, and every step hurt. The streets didn't look as cheerful anymore, and the lights and decorations didn't seem bright. I just wanted to get inside and forget what happened. When I got home, I sat by my window and looked outside, and there was snow falling. My body hurt, but I felt a lot worse on the inside. I kept thinking about the man and the look on his face. He didn't just seem angry. There was something else, something I didn't understand. The next morning was Christmas, and I opened the gifts that I had bought for myself, but it didn't make me happy. All I could think about was that guy, and I wondered why he got so angry and why he attacked me. I just couldn't figure it out. I spent the rest of the day feeling uneasy. I kept looking out the window, but there was nothing there, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and I didn't know if I would ever feel normal again. It was a Monday, exactly 1 week before Christmas, when I arrived home from work to find a package on my family's front porch. I was in my final year of high school, and I'd landed myself a holiday job so I could buy gifts. I got home, I sat by my window and looked outside, and there was snow falling. My body hurt, but I felt a lot worse on the inside. I kept thinking about the man and the look on his face. He didn't just seem angry. There was something else, something I didn't understand. The next morning was Christmas, and I opened the gifts that I had bought for myself, but it didn't make me happy. All I could think about was that guy, and I wondered why he got so angry and why he attacked me. I just couldn't figure it out. I spent the rest of the day feeling uneasy. I kept looking out the window, but there was nothing there, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and I didn't know if I would ever feel normal again. It was a Monday exactly 1 week before Christmas when I arrived home from work to find a package on my family's front porch. I was in my final year of high school, and I'd landed myself a holiday job so I could buy gifts. But since I was on the early shift and finished around 2 in the morning, or 2:30, I used to get home way earlier than my mom and dad when it was still light outside. It was addressed to my dad around the size of a shoebox and had "Handle with care" written on the plain brown wrapping paper. It didn't look like a Christmas gift, but since it was that time of the year, I figured that's what it was. I carefully picked it up and immediately noticed that it felt much heavier than it looked. I remember thinking, okay, whatever's inside must have been expensive, because the weight of it coupled with the handleware damaged care thing that made me think that it was some dishware, maybe even a car stereo kind of thing that he was into. Carefully, I set it down on the kitchen table, trying to figure out who it might be. For my dad didn't have many friends in experience. He spent most of his time at work, so I figured it was either from a client or someone from his small circle of friends. I didn't put too much thought into it, though, because all would be revealed come Christmas when he opened it. At least, that's what I thought. Mom came home a few hours later then. Dad was the last to get home, at around 6 that evening. He showed him the package. The second that he'd stepped in the kitchen, then after making coffee and asking us about our days, Dad took the package up to his office. Mom told him that he should wait till Christmas before opening it. But Dad was right when he said nothing on the package marked it out as a gift, and the wrapping paper was plain. And there wasn't any sort of Merry Christmas written on the tag. The only distinctive marking it had was my dad's name, so he figured it was something to do with work and wouldn't be particularly exciting. The last thing my mom said to him was something like, "Well, if it's edible, at least share some with us." And he said he would. And then he walked out of the kitchen seconds after my dad carried the package up to his office. I finished my coffee, put the cup in the sink, and then walked into the family room and flopped down on the couch in front of the TV. I was flicking through the channels when I called out to my mom asking what time dinner was going to be ready. I didn't get to finish that sentence, though I was midway through when we both heard this very tremendous bang coming from upstairs, and we met each other in the hallway, Mom and myself. And then ran upstairs to see what the hell made that noise. Mom made it to the door of my dad's office first, and when she opened it, I didn't see what was inside. I just sort of smelled this burning of chemicals before Mom started to scream. And what happened next was kind of a blur. I remember looking into the office and seeing my father, but then immediately slamming the door closed again, because he wasn't him anymore. It was a complete mess in there. Pieces of him were everywhere, and I knew he was dead. There was no bringing him back. And there was so much blood and bits of body everywhere that my gut reaction was to just not want to see him. My priority was Mom. And it kind of amazes me how I figured all that out in a fraction of a second, totally wordlessly. She saw what she saw and screamed like you might expect any regular person to do when they see their life partner blown apart in front of them. But with me, it was like a shutdown emotionally. So I could deal with the fact that my mom was having a complete Nervous breakdown right before my eyes. I mean, given what she'd seen, what we'd just seen, there was no telling what she was going to do. The only thing I could get her to focus on was calling 911, so that's what we did. But then she told the 911 operator what had happened. And then that sent her into a spiral again. She wailed and cried and passed the phone over to me and had to leave the room just to be able to focus on what was coming out of my mouth. It was terrible, without a doubt. The single worst thing I've ever experienced. And I know for a fact that I'll never get over it. But that's not because it was so sudden or violent. It's because even all these years later, we have no idea who sent that package or why. The only clue I got is how people at his job acted in the time after his funeral. Dad worked for some import or export company that operated out of Los Angeles and San Diego. He made them a lot of money, and he was paid handsomely for his service, as the company was amazing. In the initial aftermath of his death, they paid all of his funeral costs, made sure the life insurance and pension money came through, and even offered to pay for me and my mom to head off on a vacation. To Hawaii for about a month, though we didn't accept that offer. And when it came time for me to try and find out what Dee actually did for them, as in what his job was, they completely shut down. And they started stonewalling us. They basically said that they were more than happy to assist with any further financial costs in relation to Dad's murder. But when it came time to finding out so much as a scrap of information about how he actually made them their money, that was against company policy. They promised that they'd worked hand in foot with the cops should they reach out to talk to them. But then, according to those very same cops, the company only did the bare minimum that they were legally required to do, and then their lips were sealed, as 1C put it. They went out of their way to ensure that we only had a vague job title and description in the form of product acquisition and very little else. We didn't know what his day-to-day looked like. We didn't know the names of the people he worked with. And when it came to the possibility of Dad making any enemies through his job, his bosses and co-workers were less than helpful. It made no sense to us at the time. How could they be so helpful? And not get in trouble with the law for, I don't know, obstruction of justice or something like that. Well, they had lawyers, a lot of them, who helped them stay well within the legal guidelines, while at the same time keeping us and the cops almost completely in the dark. We had no idea who had sent that bomb, no idea why they'd wanted to kill my father, and no idea how the hell they'd managed to make the whole thing completely untraceable. The only thing the cops could think of was that whoever built that bomb and delivered it to our house had been hired as a professional to do a job. In other words, my dad was killed by a corporate hitman. They never found the guy that did it, and we never found if anyone paid to have him killed. And if so, who the pain has gotten easier over the years, and Mom definitely struggles with it from time to time. But in terms of being able to function as a family, things have gotten a lot better. The only thing I've struggled with is the resentment that I feel toward was the people he worked with. The people who abandoned us when we needed them most. And the people I'm pretty sure have intimate knowledge of the circumstances in which my dad was murdered. I've had 2 different therapists tell me that if I let it, my resentment will be the thing that destroys me. But I disagree. I think the only people who will really suffer if I let that happen are the people who know what happened to my dad. Ireland is my home, and I love it here. But there's no denying it's a very strange place with a very violent past. We love a good ghost story here. I think half the pubs and churches in County Offaly are supposed to be haunted, but I've got a little theory regarding our affinity with the mab you see when you're lush green. Emerald Isle is thus because it's been watered with the blood of countless conflicts. A daft told story about some wailing apparition is considered entertainment. The story